What is up, nerd friends? Welcome back to the Nerd Bench. First look at the all-new XR10 Stock Spec G2 speed control, the 100 amp rated all spec class racing speed control. Yes, it does blinky. Yes, it works with all the programmers. We're going to pop it open and take a look at all the cool things that it does. Woo! So there we go. Ah, the angels sing. But this is by far one of the smallest Xerun speed controls in the series. It's a little tiny guy. We'll get the calipers on that here in just a second, but you get your best friends in the whole wide world, the instruction manual, you get some mounting tape, some shrink tubing, as well as a teeny tiny cooling fan, some decals, and some zip ties in the box. Always good to have. This is what you've all been waiting for. The Stock Spec G2 speed control, now with variable drive and brake frequency, independently adjustable drag brake frequency. It's got the stronger BEC. Even the center of mass of the speed control has been lowered to make the speed control improve handling characteristics of your stock spec racing program. But we're going to hook this guy up to some power and run through the settings. Everybody's favorite part of an unboxing. We'll throw the calipers on here just to make sure you got 30 millimeter width. The case itself is going to be about 29 long, but if you go all the way to the edge of the circuit board, you're looking at about 35. And the height is a very, very short, what we got there, 13.6, 13 and a half we'll call it. And then something I always forget to do is measure the power cap. Look how tiny that guy is. A little dual power cap. The cap itself is going to be about 13 and a half by about a 9 millimeter, and then the length we got, well, that's to the shrink wrap though, so hard to say, but 16. So give you an idea there of how big it is. You get the full length one, so that's all black. And if you are ever confused, the edge of this guy, so there are markings on the edge. They're kind of hard to see, but there's a negative, a plus, and an S mark for signal when you go to plug these guys in, so you don't get that plugged into your receiver the wrong way. The speed control has the classic Hobbywing push button, and that is a programming or fan port on the top. Now, to note, any of the speed controls in the Hobbywing lineup that have this programming fan port, you can't just plug any fan into there. You got to use kind of like what I'd say medium power fans. A lot of these high power fans, or if a fan is damaged in some way, can cause some problems for the switch. Speed control won't turn off, some goofy stuff or stuff to happen. So if you do have any of that, plug your extra fans. Obviously, the fan that comes with the speed control, totally fine, but if you're running extra fans like a lot of spec racers do, often it's better to plug those into the receiver, so something to keep in. All right, so when it comes to tuning devices, you got to get in and change some speed control settings. Stock Spec G2 will work with any of these devices. The Tunalizer has the Bluetooth module built into it. The multifunction LCD Program Box Pro, or what we call the Program Box G3, will work as a standalone unit, or it also has the Bluetooth built into it so you can use the app. You can get away with the older style LCD Program Box G2. Now it's only going to work with the one that has the blue lettering here, or what the USB-C plug. It will not work with the ones that have the white lettering or the micro USB, and it will not work with the LED programming cards as well. Either. And it also, of course, works with the OTA, and that's what we're going to use to take a look at these settings. Okay, let's get into the new settings. I have this connected to a 2S battery. I have an OTA plugged in correctly. I have my phone updated. I have the most recent app version as well as the database downloaded. You fire up the speed control, lights come on, and then you go into connections up here. My OTA. If you don't have your password, it's all 8s by default unless you change it, but I already did mine in there. To get in the speed control settings, you go to parameters. To do a speed control update, you go to firmware update. To check the app settings or your Bluetooth module settings, you go to settings, and data log will show you some of the advanced data logging features that the speed control and the OTA have to offer. We'll get into that here in just a minute. So, in parameters, first and foremost, we'll jump into here and we'll talk about what all these different settings do and when you might want to use them. There are a couple new settings in the stock spec that weren't there before, and there's even some settings in the stock spec that aren't in the XR10 Pro G2S, so some cool new features added in here. So we open up here and we'll start at the top. At the top you have some preset profiles. These are all renameable and completely adjustable. Very simply put, these are loose starting points for various types of racing that you may want to get into. Saves you the time of going through and saving a bunch of settings, but in the end, don't be scared to change all that as you see fit. You can also rename your profile after you make some changes to it. So with the buttons, a little hard to see here, sorry, but you got rename, so you can rename your profiles. Reset will reset the profile. So if you make a bunch of changes and you don't like them, that'll put it back to default. If you ever do a firmware update and something acts wonky or you see some strange settings, you hit the reset there to clear any of that out. But import and export are used for saving and sharing profiles of same model and same firmware speed controls. So if the firmwares don't match, you can't share the profiles, obviously. And if they're not the same exact speed control, also can't share the profiles. And save is the most important button. You have to hit save after you make your changes to actually put those into the speed control itself. We'll get in here to the settings, and in the basic screen you have your running mode. That changes if you have reverse or not. So you can do forward brake with reverse, or you can do like a rock crawl style mode where it's instant reverse for different applications. Max reverse force is exactly that. It's your max reverse power. Sometimes tracks allow reverse, sometimes they don't, and most of us are real bad at using our reverse. So the reverse force allows you to turn that down a little bit. Voltage cutoff is for the LiPo safety. It's set to auto, which is very safe. A lot of racers disable their LiPo cutoff because they'd rather sacrifice a battery than lose a race to cutoff. But 3.5 per cell is very low. And then when you get in to make the actual adjustments, this is a total voltage number. So you can have it set as high as 7.4 volts, so when the battery gets to nominal voltage, or if you really want to ruin your battery, you can have it set very low and still have some safety type of deal. So these are total pack voltage settings, so like 7 volts is 3.5 per cell, and that's kind of where it defaults at as a starting point. Thermal protection for the motor and the speed control. These usually they have a high and a low setting, and then you can turn those off completely. Those are internal temperatures, and the motor thermal protection kind of only works on a Hobbywing motor because they're the only ones with the thermal sensor inside. BEC voltage is adjustable 6 volts or 7.4 volts for the high power servos, or high voltage servos rather. And as a side note, if you run HV servos, you can still run 6 volt BEC. It slows the servo down, makes it a little easier to drive sometimes. Remote off is the ability to stop the car, push and hold the brakes, and it turns the speed control off after the run. Helpful for some racing applications if you don't have a pitman and you need to turn your car off and set the radio down, wherever the case may be. And then this speed control also has motor rotation. In any situation where if you give the radio throttle and your tires go backwards, don't go switching wires around. Motor rotation allows you to fix that so that throttle makes the tires run the opposite direction. Phase AC swap. This one is for switching the A and well, I guess A is the blue, B is or C is the orange wire. So in applications where the 3 wires are coming through and the outside wires want to twist, not everybody likes that. So AC swap allows you to swap the A motor wire with the C motor wire so that the wires can be on the motor incorrectly and still run correctly censored. And if that doesn't make any sense, you don't mess with that. Just wire correctly, run it correctly, leave this setting disabled. Because if you get that wrong, you can damage the speed control pretty much right away if that's not all set up correctly. And I got asked once, do you do the wires before you do the setting? And it really doesn't matter which way you do it, just so long as you do it correctly and you don't try to run the motor until you're sure that the wires and the setting match each other. So by default, A to A, B to B, C to C, but if for some reason you want to run A to C and C to A, the AC swap, or the phase AC swap is where that gets done. So now we get into the fun, kind of more tuning settings. Throttle rate control. This is kind of like your punch. The higher this is, the more one-to-one it is. At maximum, where it's at now 30, the speed control is going to try to do whatever you do with your throttle input. So if you crank on the throttle, the speed control is going to do the same thing. So you can use the throttle rate to calm the throttle down. If you feel like it's too sensitive and it reacts too quickly, throttle rate control allows you to tame that quite a bit. The lower you run it, the more time the delay there is on your input. So as you ratchet on the throttle, the speed control is not going to do that. The lower it is, the slower it is, essentially. Throttle curvature, that's one of the new ones. This allows you to add throttle curve through the speed control to the linear inputs. So instead of having just regular straight linear throttle, one-to-one type of deal, this allows you to adjust that in a positive or a negative. So you can add positive throttle curvature to kind of increase the punch, if you will, brings the mid-range closer to the bottom of the trigger. And if for whatever reason you got slick track conditions, you like the way everything feels, it's just a little bit too sensitive, you can use the throttle curvature to add some negative expo. It's very much like a radio's expo or a radio's throttle curve works. We just do it in the speed control now. So if you don't have that in your radio, or maybe you're not keen on using the radio for all that stuff, this allows you to do that from the speed control itself. So pretty cool. Neutral range is your deadband between your throttle and your brake. So if you notice that your drag brakes are real inconsistent, or if you're using reverse and the reverse doesn't want to come on, neutral range should be increased. It allows more space for the speed control to recognize neutral, and it helps make that a little bit more consistent. I've said it many times before, throttle pots on radios can wear out over time, and it shifts the neutral around, and that's why this setting exists at all. Initial throttle force is kind of like punch, but it's more, I guess, directly related to the startup of the motor. And for a lot of the spec racing applications, we run the initial throttle force cranked all the way up for the most response when we first touch the trigger. If you ever run in a motor and you notice that very little bit of trigger that you give it, the motor doesn't want to move, initial throttle force allows you to get rid of that delay or that dead spot, so to speak. Coast is one that doesn't get used very often unless you're in a very, very slick track condition, maybe like dirt oval stuff that's very, very loose. If the motor decelerates at all, it makes the car want to spin out. Coast lets you have basically no decel in the motor. It'll make the motor have a bit of a run on it. It reduces any sort of mechanical drag that the motor has. The higher it is, the more coast you get, type of deal. Not super common, but is kind of helpful in very, very slick track conditions where when you get off the throttle, the car wants to get loose. PWM drive frequency. Now, this one is very popular as of late because with the XR10 Pro G2S, we've been using this a lot in the spec racing for the customized throttle curve that you can get into. And let's show you what this looks like right here. Click. Oh, you click that, then confirm, and then it asks you if you want the variable or the constant. We want the variable. So this is the throttle curve chart, and if you do this number, it gets bigger and it's a little easier. This is your throttle position. This is zero throttle. This is full throttle, and you can adjust the drive frequency depending on where the throttle position is. This allows you to fine-tune throttle response based off of trigger position. So a 50% trigger, you want it to be very smooth or aggressive. You can run your frequency as you see fit. And for a lot of folks, they want it maybe smooth in the beginning, so they'll run a high frequency up here. They want the rip to come in later, so they can run a lower frequency there. And because it's trigger dependent, you can use that to adjust certain spots on the track. So a pretty cool feature that a lot of the spec racers have been using. Most of us run like from 2K up to about 32K, some 2K to 16K. Kind of depends on the motor and the track. The higher the RPM, motors kind of like higher frequencies for overall efficiency, so that can help with overall power feel, if you will. Does it actually make it faster, slower? In my personal opinion, probably not, but it does help for the overall efficiency, which can turn into power. Now, softening value, softening range, these are two that are used for detuning the motor in non-blinky class racing applications. These are only allowed to be used in non-blinky. If you're racing blinky class, that's zero electronic timing, softening is not allowed. So softening value is how much power it takes away, and the softening range is that the range of the throttle that it takes away from 0 to whatever the percentage is. So you can go all the way up to 75% for power limiting. Something that's very popular and modified and can be used in spec racing to help reduce temperatures, but like I said, only in non-blinky racing applications. RPM limit. This is one that's fun. A lot of the international races, they use this to control top speeds for given spec classes. They say you can only run this RPM setting, and you can have from as low as 10,000 RPM in like 1,000 RPM steps all the way up to a max of 88,000 RPM. So a lot of different settings that you can run for RPM limiting. For regular open racing, probably not going to be super popular, but if you have spec racing or the cars are too fast and you're in a group of friends, you can all turn your RPM limit down. Use it as a handicapper. The more races you win, the lower your RPM limit is, stuff like that. Pretty cool. Now getting into the brake control here, drag brake is not drag racing brakes. Never use drag brake if you drag race. That's a pro tip. But it's the brakes at neutral, so the motor will automatically decel. The speed control will put the brakes on for you when you get to neutral. Helpful for high grip if you're going to be immediately pushing brake in a lot of the corners. Drag brake allows you to not have to think so much about that. It'll apply brake for you. Drag brake rate is how quickly the speed control applies those drag brakes. So instead of just snapping a median line to the value, it can apply them faster or slower depending on what you need. So this is your drag brake frequency. This is another new one. Previously, the drag brake frequency was the same as your brake frequency. With this speed control, you can have independent control of your drag brake, so it allows you more fine-tuning of your drag brake. Not only can control how fast they come in and how much you have, but the actual frequency of the drag brake for more fine-tuning. So let's say you really like your push brake feel, but your drag brake is either too aggressive or too soft, you can't get it just right. Frequency allows you to adjust just the drag brake frequency to fine-tune that. So one of the new cool features here in the Stock Spec G2. And then max brake force is your overall brake power, so you can reduce overall brakes in case they're a little too snappy on you. You don't want to use the radio, allows you to do it in here. Brake rate control, much like throttle rate control, is kind of the same gig. You want that to be linear. It'll be turned all the way up at 20, and if the brakes are too responsive or you feel like you can't push the brakes slow enough, you can start to lower your brake rate control. Brake curvature, like the throttle curvature, another one of the new settings, allows you to add some curve through the speed control. A lot like throttle or like Radio Expo. This is going to allow you to do it in the actual speed control itself. Down at the bottom, brake frequency. And I think I may have glossed over this when we talked about the drive frequency. A frequency, whether it be a brake frequency or a drive frequency, kind of function similar in that higher frequencies are going to be smoother, maybe a little bit more efficient in some situations, and lower frequencies are going to be more aggressive feeling or more responsive. So like a higher drive frequency is going to feel smoother than a lower frequency is going to have more punch. Kind of the same with a brake frequency, that lower frequencies have more response, or like they feel like you're hitting the brakes a little bit harder. And the brake frequency got updated to allow the customizable curve as well, and that allows you to set the frequencies where your brake position is. So if you run into a situation where the track is very slick, but you still need low speed braking, brake frequency allows you to set the initial brake extremely smooth, so at high speeds it's not very responsive, and as you bury into the brakes you get more response as the car slows down. So very handy for fine tuning. And then at the bottom of the parameters you see the data record. The speed control saves some data inside of itself in its onboard data logging. Mins and maxes is what I call it. Maximum speed control temperature, maximum motor temperature, the minimum battery voltage that it saw, the max RPM that was recorded, as well as the current that it saw over the course of the run. These are all maxes. So it gives you some helpful tuning for practicing or even checking temperatures over the course of a day. If you feel like something got a little hotter, you can come in here and check your internal motor temperatures, internal speed control temperatures. But they're not, people get a little confused because they don't always compare to the external temperatures. Of course not. The inside is going to be much hotter than the outside. So if you check the external temperatures, they're not going to match these numbers, but they're a good reference point. And as I hope I mentioned in the beginning, anytime you make setting changes, you do have to push save. Just because you change it on the screen, it doesn't take to the speed control until you hit save. Once you get that done, you can back out to the main menu, disconnect, and you're good to go back into action. Okay, so up next, we're going to show basic calibration. I have the speed control connected to a Just Stock 17.5 motor, sorry. Connected correctly to the throttle channel of my receiver that has already been bound to my radio. This is a FlySky Noble Pro. Very nice radio if you're in the market for a radio. I have a couple of these now, and they're great. But this is basic calibration. This applies to any of the single button Hobbywing speed controls, and it works as follows. It's a long press and hold of the power button. The light will come on. It'll start to beep. You let go. Then you set the neutral by tapping the button. Beeps once. You apply full throttle and hold. Tap the button again. Beeps twice. Push full reverse and hold. Tap the button. Beeps 3 times, and that is the calibration process. When you have your softening stuff set to 0, this is the blinky mode that you will get. Much like the previous versions of blinky mode speed controls, it does the several blinks, then a pause, then several blinks, and as you apply throttle, it blinks rapidly, and when you get to full throttle, it goes to solid green. Reverse is much the same way, partial blinks, and then when it goes to solid green for full brakes. And then if the speed control does lose signal from the receiver, it lets you know. The radio is letting us know it lost signal from the receiver because I unplugged it while it was turned on. So you get this beeping as a warning, so that if you're trying to go through tech and pull some janky stuff to show them that's the blinky, it's not going to work. Okay, we got everything connected correctly. Throttle channel to receiver, motor here is connected, and we're going to take a look at some of the other cool features that the Stock Spec G2S has to offer. Turn on the speed control first, everything lights up. We're going to connect to our OTA module. There. And then you can jump into data logs, and you can go to real-time data. And what this does is it rearms the speed control, and it allows you to see your actual throttle inputs, RPM, the current coming out of the speed control, temperatures that are being recorded, all live right on the bench. This can be helpful to turn your car into kind of like a benchtop dyno almost, because you can sit and go check max RPM, see what the current straw is doing. You can use this to troubleshoot a good or a bad motor, in fact. So some pretty cool features in there. And if you drive your RC car with your OTA installed, not connected, you do some runs around the track, this will save data inside of itself, and that gets viewed here in the history. And you save from OTA, and you get these drop down of files, and you can see your various runs that get saved in your OTA. Now, sadly, both of these are not going to work because I haven't actually run the speed control in a car. It needs to data log for 10-20 seconds before or it needs to run for about 10-20 seconds before the data log will start, and then you'll be able to see a full graph of all those cool features. So pretty neat stuff there. And then if we back out to here, and you go to data log, and you say data record from the car, it'll drop you down into the speed control's actual settings. And you'll be able to see the different data logs that are saved in the speed control itself, and that saves those to the app for review at a later date. Now, again, this speed control hasn't been run, so those are not actual data logs from the speed control. I just opened it up and did calibration and ran it a little bit here on the bench, so none of that stuff really sticks. But as you drive the car around, of course, that all works. And then if you want to see how to do a firmware update, let's take a look. You'll jump into firmware, and you see you do have an option here for a boost. And the reason that is for the drift guys and non-blinky class racers that still do open spec class racing. The speed control has boost and turbo available if you update to that firmware, but the standard firmware is the one that does not have boost in the name. So you just select which one you want, you hit update firmware, and away it goes. Pro tip though, make sure you don't move the phone, maybe put it in airplane mode before you start. If there's any sort of interruption with signal, walk away with the phone during a firmware update. You can brick a speed control, and nobody wants it. Let's talk about the hard specs, as they call them. Speed control is rated for 100 amps, as we've seen in the name, a peak of 500 amps. And again, are these little speed controls going to pass that much current? Probably not. Those are specifications based off the MOSFETs that we use to manufacture these guys. It is a sensored or sensorless speed control, meaning that if you were to run it on a sensorless speed motor, or the sensor wire came unplugged, it would still function. It's not going to work as good as it does sensor mode, obviously. It's rated for 2S only with a motor limit of 10.5 turns. And it does have a 6 or 7 volt BEC. That is a 5 amp regulator. There's a switching style BEC, so you get that good BEC efficiency. With the wires, it's stated as 63 grams, in case you're into that sort of thing. And it does work with all the tuners, including the newest LCD Program Box Pro that has the built-in Bluetooth, so you get the best of both worlds, just like these two guys stuck together. Or if you have a tunalizer or are looking for an excuse to get a tunalizer, the tunalizer also has Bluetooth built in, so something to consider if you're a spec racing guru, if you will. Everybody needs a tunalizer. Don't forget we have a podcast. It's called RC Stuff, powered by Hobbywing. Look it up on your favorite podcast service. We give away a free combo each and every episode, and we're surely going to be giving away one of these new Stock Spec G2s. To find out how to enter to win, all you have to do is listen to an episode. If you do have any questions, something we missed, something you need to know, shoot us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com, to get you the answers that you're looking for. And as always, folks, thanks for tuning in. New every Tuesday right here on the Hobbywing official YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, everybody.